The metallic taste of recycled airport air filled my lungs as I pressed my phone harder against my ear, fighting to hear my assistant over the chaos of JFK's Terminal 4. Snow pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows with increasing fury, transforming the December evening into a wall of white that had already grounded half the flights on the departure board. "Grace, I'm sorry, but the Hartwell deposition has been moved to 9 a.m. tomorrow." Sarah's voice crackled through the connection. The partners are expecting the Morrison brief on their desks first thing Monday morning. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion settle between my shoulder blades. 14-hour days had become my normal since making junior partner at Whitmore & Associates 6 months ago. The promotion I'd fought for throughout my 20s now felt like a beautifully gilded cage, trapping me in a cycle of billable hours and client demands that left little room for anything resembling a personal life. "Send me the Morrison files," I said, already calculating how many hours I'd need to work through the weekend. "I'll review them on the flight." "About that," Sarah hesitated. "Your flight to Boston has been delayed indefinitely. Weather's getting worse." Through the terminal's speakers, a gate agent's voice confirmed my worst fears. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to severe weather conditions, all flights departing JFK have been suspended until further notice. Passengers are advised to contact their airlines for rebooking options." A collective groan rose from the waiting area as hundreds of travelers realized they'd be spending the night in uncomfortable airport chairs or hunting for hotel rooms in a city where every available bed would be claimed within the hour. I surveyed the terminal, taking in the families with crying children, business travelers frantically making phone calls, and couples arguing over their ruined vacation plans. My black wool coat suddenly felt stifling in the overheated terminal. I'd dressed for Boston's frigid December weather, not for being stranded in New York. The tailored charcoal suit underneath, my armor for corporate battles, now seemed absurdly formal for sleeping on an airport bench. My laptop bag, heavy with files that needed reviewing, cut into my shoulder with each movement. The scent of overpriced coffee and industrial cleaning supplies mixed with the underlying tension of displaced travelers. Somewhere nearby, a baby wailed with the particular pitch that seemed designed to frazzle already strained nerves. The constant hum of announcements, rolling luggage, and anxious conversations created a soundtrack of modern frustration. "Grace?" Sarah's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I managed, watching a young mother try to console her toddler while juggling a diaper bag and a travel crib. "Listen, call the hotel in Boston and cancel my reservation. I'll figure out where to stay here." "Already tried booking you something in Manhattan," Sarah said apologetically. "Everything's completely booked. The concierge at the Meridian said they might have cancellations after midnight, but no guarantees." I ended the call and stood in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by chaos but feeling utterly alone. This was the price of building a career that left no room for contingencies, for relationships that might provide a couch to crash on during emergencies. My parents lived in Connecticut, but the thought of calling them for help made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. They'd never understood my choice to pursue corporate law instead of the family practice they'd envisioned, and every conversation became a subtle reminder of their disappointment. The announcement board flickered with updated delays and cancellations. My flight to Boston now showed "canceled" in unforgiving red letters. Around me, travelers were forming increasingly desperate lines at customer service desks, their patience fraying with each passing minute. I pulled out my phone to check rideshare availability, unsurprised to find surge pricing that would cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Every available car was at least 40 minutes away, and the estimated fare to Manhattan made me wince. But what choice did I have? Sleeping in an airport chair would hardly prepare me for tomorrow's deposition. "Excuse me," a voice said behind me, low and cultured with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "Are you trying to get into the city?" I turned to find a man watching me with dark eyes that seemed to notice everything. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders that filled out his expensive black wool coat perfectly. His dark hair was styled with careful precision, and despite the travel chaos around us, he looked completely composed. There was something magnetic about his presence, a quality that made other travelers unconsciously step aside as he moved through the crowd. "Yes," I said cautiously, my lawyer's instincts automatically assessing potential threats. He didn't look dangerous. Quite the opposite. His charcoal suit was clearly bespoke, his shoes Italian leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A platinum watch caught the harsh terminal lighting as he gestured toward the exit. "My flight was canceled as well," he said, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that suggested he was accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I've arranged transportation into Manhattan. You're welcome to share if you'd like." Every rule my mother had drilled into me about stranger danger screamed warnings, but fatigue and practicality won out. The alternative was waiting indefinitely for an overpriced ride or spending the night in an airport chair. Besides, this man didn't look like the type who needed to prey on stranded travelers. Everything about him, from his perfectly tailored clothes to his confident bearing, suggested significant wealth and success. "That's very kind of you," I said, extending my hand. "Grace Morrison." His handshake was firm, warm, and brief. "Griffin," he replied, not offering a last name. "Shall we?" He gestured toward the exit with a slight smile that transformed his stern features. There was something almost old-fashioned about his mannerisms, a formality that seemed out of place among the casual chaos of modern travel. As we walked toward the terminal exit, I noticed how other people seemed to notice him without quite knowing why. Conversations paused as he passed, heads turned, though he appeared oblivious to the attention. The automatic doors opened to reveal a wall of snow and wind that immediately stole my breath. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since I'd arrived that afternoon, and the storm showed no signs of abating. Griffin placed a protective hand on my lower back, guiding me toward a black sedan that waited at the curb with its engine running. The driver emerged as we approached, a compact, efficient-looking man in a dark suit who moved with the particular alertness I associated with security personnel. He opened the rear door without a word, his eyes constantly scanning the area around us with professional vigilance. "After you," Griffin said, his breath visible in the frigid air. The car's interior was a haven of warmth and luxury. Black leather seats, climate control that had already banished the December chill, and the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with new car leather. As Griffin settled beside me, I noticed the quality of his cologne, something woody and sophisticated that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Where in Manhattan?" Griffin asked as the driver pulled away from the terminal. "Midtown would be perfect," I said, settling into the heated leather seat. "I can catch a cab from there to wherever I end up staying." He studied me for a moment, those dark eyes unreadable. "Business or pleasure?" "Business," I replied automatically. "Well, it was supposed to be. A deposition in Boston tomorrow that I'll now need to reschedule." "Lawyer?" he said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "How did you know?" A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The way you assess everything, calculate risks, measure words before speaking. Plus, the briefcase and the fact that you're traveling alone on a Friday night for a Saturday morning deposition suggests dedication that goes beyond normal business hours." His observation was unnervingly accurate. I did assess everything, a habit developed through years of legal training and reinforced by experience in courtrooms where a single misplaced word could cost clients millions. But there was something unsettling about being read so easily by a stranger. "And you?" I asked. "What brings you to New York on such a lovely evening?" "Meetings," he said simply. "Business that doesn't reschedule easily." The vague answer triggered my professional curiosity, but something in his tone discouraged further questions. Outside the windows, the storm continued its assault on the city. Snow accumulated on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, and the few other vehicles on the road moved with the cautious pace of drivers who understood they were fighting nature itself. "This is worse than they predicted," I observed, watching a taxi fishtail slightly before recovering control. Griffin's expression darkened as he looked out at the worsening conditions. Weather like this changes plans, forces people to adapt quickly. He glanced at me. Sometimes that reveals who someone really is. There was something prophetic in his words, though I couldn't have known then how dramatically my own plans were about to change. The warm leather seat, the gentle hum of expensive German engineering, and the exhaustion of a 16-hour workday combined to create a cocoon of false security. For the first time in months, I felt myself beginning to relax. The driver's voice cut through my growing comfort, speaking in what sounded like Italian. Griffin responded in the same language, his tone sharp and commanding. Whatever the conversation was about, it wasn't pleasant. The driver's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I noticed his eyes checking the rear-view mirror more frequently. "Everything all right?" I asked, lawyer's instincts prickling. Griffin's expression had shifted, becoming more alert, more dangerous somehow. "Probably nothing," he said, but his body language suggested otherwise. "Marco, take the bridge." We turned onto a route I didn't recognize, heading toward what I assumed was the Queensboro Bridge. The car moved faster now, despite the worsening road conditions. Griffin's attention was focused entirely on the mirrors and side windows, his earlier relaxed demeanor replaced by something much more intense. "Griffin," I said carefully, "what's—" The rear window exploded. Griffin threw himself across me, pressing me down into the leather seat as glass showered the interior. The car swerved violently, Marco fighting to maintain control as something metallic pinged off the trunk. Over the howling wind and screeching tires, I heard the unmistakable crack of gunfire. "Stay down," Griffin commanded, his weight pinning me to the seat. In the chaos, I glimpsed him pulling something from inside his coat, something black and metallic that definitely wasn't a cell phone. The fairy tale evening of shared transportation and mysterious charm had just become a nightmare, and I realized with crystalline clarity that I knew absolutely nothing about the man whose car I was sharing, whose protection I was now dependent upon, and whose world I had just been violently thrust into. The last coherent thought I had before terror took over completely was wondering what kind of business meetings involve people shooting at your car in the middle of a blizzard. The car careened through the snow-slicked streets as Griffin barked orders in rapid Italian to Marco, who responded with the practiced precision of someone accustomed to life-threatening situations. My ears rang from the gunshots, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of fear-induced adrenaline flooding my system. "Who's shooting at us?" I gasped, my voice barely audible over the wind whipping through the shattered rear window. Griffin's dark eyes met mine, and in them I saw a coldness that made my blood freeze more effectively than the December air. "People who made a very serious mistake," he said, checking the clip of his gun with movements so fluid they spoke of extensive practice. Another burst of gunfire shattered what remained of the rear window. Marco yanked the wheel hard left, sending the sedan into a controlled skid that somehow ended with us racing down a side street I didn't recognize. The city lights blurred past in streams of gold and white, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope that made my stomach lurch. "Griffin," I tried again, my lawyer's mind desperately seeking information, even as my body trembled with shock. "What kind of business are you in?" He was silent for a long moment, his attention focused on the side mirror where headlights were gaining on us despite Marco's evasive driving. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the answer would change everything between us. "The kind where people don't usually get second chances to walk away," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you're caught in this, Grace. I never intended for an innocent to be involved." Innocent. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Whatever world Griffin inhabited, I had just been violently inducted into it through the simple act of accepting a ride from a stranger. The corporate law battles that had consumed my life suddenly seemed laughably civilized compared to the very real bullets that had just missed ending my existence. Marco spoke urgently in Italian, pointing ahead toward what I could see was the approach to the Queensboro Bridge. Even through the storm, the bridge's lights were visible, a beacon of civilization that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Griffin responded with what sounded like disagreement, but Marco shook his head emphatically. "He says the bridge is our best option," Griffin translated, though his expression suggested he disagreed with his driver's assessment. "Limited access points, harder for them to box us in." "Them?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "How many people are trying to kill us?" Griffin's smile was sharp and completely devoid of humor. Enough to make this interesting. The entrance to the bridge loomed ahead, its massive steel structure disappearing into the swirling snow. Traffic was light due to the storm, which meant fewer civilians at risk, but also fewer places to hide. As we accelerated onto the bridge's span, I could see our pursuers emerging from the maze of Queen streets, 3 black SUVs moving in formation with military precision. "Professional," Griffin observed, watching them in the mirror. "This isn't random street crime." My mind raced through the implications. Professional meant organized. Organized meant planned. Planned meant Griffin was either very important or very dangerous, possibly both. The expensive clothes and cultured manner I'd initially found attractive now took on a more sinister cast. Wealthy men who traveled with armed drivers and attracted professional assassins didn't typically run legitimate businesses. "Griffin," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "I need you to tell me who you really are." He looked at me then. Really looked, as if seeing me for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. A calculation, a decision being made. "My name is Griffin Castellano," he said finally. "My family has been in New York for 4 generations, building something that others want to destroy." Castellano. The name triggered a memory from law school, from a professor who'd discussed organized crime cases with the kind of academic detachment that made real violence seem theoretical. The Castellano family was old money New York, with business interests that spanned from legitimate real estate to less savory enterprises that prosecutors had never quite managed to prove in court. "Mafia," I whispered, the word escaping before I could stop it. Griffin's jaw tightened. "We prefer family business," he said, but there was no denial in his voice. "Though I suppose the distinction matters little to you now." The SUVs were gaining ground, their powerful engines cutting through the snow more effectively than our sedan. Marco was pushing our car to its limits, but physics and weather were working against us. The bridge stretched ahead like a gauntlet, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. "What do they want?" I asked, gripping the door handle as Marco took a curve faster than seemed safe. "Territory," Griffin replied, his attention split between the pursuing vehicles and something he was reading on his phone. "The Volkov family thinks they can challenge traditional boundaries, expand their operations into areas that have been closed to them for decades." Volkov. Russian, I assumed, which meant this was more than just a local power struggle. International organized crime, territories spanning continents, resources that could buy corruption at the highest levels of government. I was trapped in a car with a man whose world operated by rules I couldn't even begin to understand. "And you won't let them," I said, beginning to grasp the larger picture. Griffin's smile was genuinely warm for the first time since the shooting started. "Very good, counselor. You understand the situation perfectly." A new sound cut through the wind and engine noise, the distinctive whoop 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 of helicopter rotors. Griffin cursed in Italian, a string of words that needed no translation. Above us, barely visible through the swirling snow, a black helicopter kept pace with our convoy of vehicles. "Marco, the service road," Griffin commanded, pointing toward an upcoming exit that seemed to lead nowhere but darkness. "That's not an exit," I protested. "That's maintenance access." Griffin's grin was fierce and predatory. "Exactly. which means it's not monitored by traffic cameras, and there are no civilians to complicate matters. The implications of his words sank in like ice water. He wasn't trying to escape the confrontation. He was maneuvering toward it, choosing ground that would allow him to fight without witnesses or collateral damage. This wasn't panic or desperation. This was strategy. Marco yanked the wheel hard right, sending us skidding down a narrow ramp that led to the bridge's lower maintenance level. The pursuing SUVs followed without hesitation, confirming that this wasn't a random attack, but a planned assault by people who knew Griffin's likely escape routes. "How long have they been watching you?" I asked, as we raced along a service road that ran beneath the main bridge span. "Weeks, probably months," Griffin replied, checking his weapon again. "Viktor Volkov is nothing if not thorough. He's been planning this move for a long time." The service road ended at a maintenance facility built into the bridge's superstructure, a concrete bunker designed to house equipment and personnel during repairs. Marco pulled the car behind the building, using it as cover from the helicopter that was still circling overhead. "Stay in the car," Griffin ordered, his hand on the door handle. "Whatever happens, don't get out until I come back for you." "Where are you going?" I demanded, panic rising in my throat. His expression softened slightly. "To end this before it gets worse. These people operate on fear and intimidation. Show them weakness, and they'll never stop coming." The SUVs had followed us down the service road, and were now approaching the maintenance facility in a wide formation designed to prevent escape. Through the swirling snow, I could see armed figures emerging from the vehicles, moving with the coordinated precision of military professionals. Griffin stepped out into the storm, and I watched in fascination and horror as he transformed. The cultured businessman I'd shared pleasant conversation with disappeared, replaced by something primal and dangerous. He moved through the snow with absolute confidence, his weapon held with the casual competence of someone who'd done this many times before. The first gunshot echoed off the concrete walls of the facility, followed immediately by return fire from multiple directions. I pressed myself down into the leather seat, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This was real. People were trying to kill each other, and I was trapped in the middle of a war between criminals who settled disputes with bullets instead of lawsuits. Through the passenger window, I caught glimpses of Griffin moving between the maintenance equipment, using concrete barriers and steel girders as cover, while he systematically eliminated his attackers. Each movement was calculated, efficient, lethal. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no resemblance to the charming stranger who'd offered to share a cab. A face appeared at the driver's side window. Young, Slavic features, eyes wide with adrenaline and fear. He was reaching for the door handle when Griffin appeared behind him like a shadow, ending the threat with a precision that spoke of extensive training and zero conscience. "It's over," Griffin said, opening the passenger door and sliding back into the car. His expensive coat was torn, and there was blood on his hands, but his expression was calm, almost serene. "Marco, take us to the Meridian." I stared at him, struggling to reconcile the composed man adjusting his cufflinks with the efficient killer I'd just witnessed. "The hotel? We're just going to check in like nothing happened?" "The Meridian is secure," Griffin explained, his voice returning to the cultured tone I'd first found attractive. "And we need to discuss your situation." "My situation?" I repeated, hysteria creeping into my voice. "I don't have a situation. I'm a corporate lawyer who was trying to catch a flight to Boston. I don't know anything about family territories or Russian crime families or whatever this is." Griffin's dark eyes studied me with the same intensity he'd shown while planning the confrontation with our attackers. "You know my name now, Grace. You've seen what I'm capable of. You've been present during a direct assault on my operations." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Whether you intended it or not, you're now part of this world." The car moved smoothly through the empty streets, the storm providing cover for our retreat from the scene of what I was beginning to understand had been a massacre. Behind us, the bridge disappeared into the swirling snow, along with any illusion I'd harbored about the nature of the man sitting beside me. "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Griffin's smile was gentle, almost apologetic, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. It means, counselor, that your old life ended the moment you got into this car. What happens next depends entirely on how quickly you can adapt to your new circumstances. The Meridian Hotel rose from the Manhattan landscape like a monument to old-world elegance, its Art Deco facade glowing warmly against the storm-darkened sky. Even through the driving snow, I could see the discreet but unmistakable signs of serious security. Men in expensive suits positioned at strategic points, their eyes constantly scanning the street with professional vigilance. Marco pulled the sedan into a private entrance I hadn't noticed from the street, where uniformed attendants moved with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd been expecting us, despite the night's violent detour. One of them opened my door with a deferential nod, as if women in torn stockings and shock-pale complexions were a regular feature of his evening routine. "Welcome to the Meridian, Ms. Morrison," he said, somehow knowing my name despite the fact that I'd never been here before. "Your suite is ready." I looked sharply at Griffin, who was emerging from the other side of the car with his customary composure restored. His torn coat had been replaced with a fresh one that appeared from nowhere, and the blood had been cleaned from his hands during the short drive from the bridge. Only the heightened alertness in his dark eyes suggested that anything unusual had occurred. "How do they know my name?" I demanded as we entered the hotel's opulent lobby. "The same way I knew where to find transportation when our flights were canceled," Griffin replied, guiding me toward a private elevator with his hand at the small of my back. Good information is the foundation of any successful operation. The elevator rose smoothly past floors filled with what I assumed were ordinary guests living ordinary lives, blissfully unaware that they were sharing their accommodations with people who settled business disputes with gunfire. The lobby had been beautiful in the way that only unlimited money could achieve: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in museums rather than hotels. "Griffin," I said as the floors ticked by, "I need you to understand something. I have a life, a career, people who will notice if I disappear." He turned to study me with that unsettling intensity I was beginning to recognize. "Tell me about your life, Grace. This career that's so important to you." The question caught me off guard, partly because it was the first time he'd shown genuine interest in my circumstances, and partly because examining my life from this new perspective revealed just how isolated I'd become. "I'm a junior partner at Whitmore & Associates, corporate law, mostly mergers and acquisitions. I work 70-hour weeks, bill clients at rates that would fund small countries, and haven't had a vacation in 3 years. "Family?" he asked. "Parents in Connecticut who think I've wasted my potential on corporate greed instead of public service. No siblings, no significant other who could tolerate competing with my billable hours for attention." The words came out more bitter than I'd intended, revealing truths I'd been avoiding about the emptiness of my supposedly successful existence. "Friends who will miss you?" Griffin pressed. I considered the question seriously, running through my contacts list in my mind. "Colleagues, mostly. People I work with but don't really know. A few law school acquaintances I see at bar association events." The realization was more painful than I wanted to admit. No one who would call the police if I missed a few days of work. Griffin nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Loneliness makes people vulnerable, Grace. It also makes them adaptable." The elevator opened onto a hallway that screamed wealth and discretion. Thick carpeting muffled our footsteps as Griffin led me to a suite at the far end, where a man in an expensive suit was waiting with the kind of patience that suggested he'd been there for hours. "Vincent," Griffin acknowledged with a nod. "Status?" "The Volkov situation has been contained," Vincent replied in accents that placed his origins somewhere in Brooklyn. 8 confirmed eliminated. No survivors to report back to Moscow. The bridge incident will be classified as weather-related accidents. Poor visibility. Multiple vehicle collision. Very tragic. Griffin's casual acceptance of what amounted to mass murder sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the work of street criminals or desperate men making poor choices. This was institutional violence, carried out with the kind of resources and planning that suggested vast organizational backing. "And our guests' accommodations?" Griffin asked, gesturing toward me. Vincent's eyes assessed me with professional detachment before he answered. "The penthouse suite is secure. All electronic surveillance has been disabled per your instructions, and the staff has been briefed on privacy protocols. Ms. Morrison's absence from her normal routine has been explained as a family emergency requiring extended travel." "Wait," I interrupted, my lawyer's training finally overriding my shock. "You can't just rearrange my life without my consent. I have rights, legal protections." Griffin's smile was gentle but implacable. "Grace, you're thinking like someone who still lives in the world of laws and courts and constitutional protections. That world operates on the assumption that everyone agrees to follow the same rules." He gestured toward the elegant hallway around us. "This world operates on different principles entirely." Vincent handed Griffin a tablet, which he studied briefly before nodding. "Excellent work. Make sure the families of the deceased receive appropriate compensation. Standard amounts, no questions asked. And Vincent?" Griffin's voice hardened slightly. "I want to know how Victor's people tracked us so precisely. Someone had information they shouldn't have had." "Already investigating," Vincent replied. "We'll have answers within the hour." The casual efficiency with which they discussed covering up multiple homicides and tracking down security leaks was almost as frightening as the violence itself. This wasn't chaos or desperation. This was business as usual, conducted with the same professional competence I brought to merger negotiations. Griffin opened the suite door and ushered me inside, where I found myself in accommodations that redefined luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the storm creating a dramatic backdrop for the city lights below. The furniture was antique, but perfectly maintained, the kind of pieces that belonged in European castles rather than hotel rooms. "This is beautiful," I said automatically, my corporate training making polite conversation even under these surreal circumstances. "It should be," Griffin replied, moving to a well-stocked bar and pouring himself what looked like very expensive whiskey. "My family owns the hotel." Of course they did. I was beginning to understand that Griffin's influence extended far beyond what I'd initially imagined. This wasn't just organized crime. This was generational wealth and power built over decades, possibly centuries, with tentacles reaching into every aspect of legitimate society. "Drink?" he offered, holding up a crystal decanter. "I don't think alcohol is a good idea right now," I said, settling onto a sofa that probably cost more than my car. "I need to think clearly." Griffin settled into the chair across from me, crossing his legs with elegant precision. In the warm light of the suite's lamps, he looked like exactly what he'd first appeared to be: a successful businessman with excellent taste and unlimited resources. Only the alertness in his eyes and the way he positioned himself with clear sightlines to all entrances betrayed his true nature. "What are you thinking about, Grace?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "Escape routes," I answered honestly. "Legal options. Ways to extract myself from this situation before it gets any worse." "And what have you concluded?" I met his gaze directly, calling on every ounce of courtroom confidence I'd developed over years of high-stakes negotiations. "That I'm completely fucked." Griffin's laugh was rich and genuinely amused. "Very good. Accurate assessment of your position is the first step toward finding a workable solution." "Which would be?" He set down his whiskey and leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "That depends on what you want, Grace. What kind of life you're willing to accept going forward." "I want my old life back," I said immediately. "No, you don't," Griffin replied with quiet certainty. "Your old life was killing you slowly. 70-hour work weeks, no real relationships, no joy, no passion. You were successful by conventional measures, but you weren't actually living. The observation stung because it was true. I'd built a career that impressed strangers and left me empty, accumulating achievements that felt hollow the moment they were accomplished. The partnership I'd fought for had brought more work and more isolation, not the satisfaction I'd expected. "What are you suggesting?" I asked carefully. Griffin stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the storm that was finally beginning to ease. "My world offers things your world never could. Real power, instead of the illusion of influence. Genuine importance rather than billable hours. Protection from threats you never knew existed. In exchange for what?" He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "Loyalty, discretion, trust." He paused. "And the understanding that once you're part of this family, you're part of it permanently." The word family carried weight beyond its literal meaning, suggesting bonds that transcended blood relationships. I'd read enough about organized crime to understand that family loyalty was absolute, enforced by consequences that made corporate politics look like playground squabbles. "And if I refuse?" Griffin's smile was sad, but determined. "Then you'll be relocated somewhere safe, with a new identity and enough money to start over. You'll never see New York again, never practice law again, never have any contact with your previous life." "Witness protection," I realized. "Something like that," he agreed, "though administered privately, with better funding and more permanent arrangements." The choice he was offering wasn't really a choice at all. Join his organization or disappear forever. The life I'd built, unsatisfying as it was, would be erased either way. The only question was whether I'd have any agency in what replaced it. "What would my role be?" I asked, surprised by my own pragmatism. "If I chose to stay?" Griffin's expression brightened with what looked like genuine pleasure. "You're a lawyer, Grace. Someone with expertise in corporate law, merger negotiations, regulatory compliance. Do you have any idea how valuable those skills are to an organization like mine?" I was beginning to. Organized crime in the modern era wasn't just about violence and intimidation. It was about moving money, acquiring legitimate businesses, navigating complex legal structures designed to hide ownership and deflect investigation. Someone with my background could be invaluable in building the kind of empire that operated in both shadows and sunlight. "Legal, but not entirely ethical," I said, testing my understanding. "Profitable, but not always conventional," Griffin corrected. "Everything my family does serves a purpose, Grace. We maintain order in situations where the official authorities are ineffective. We provide services that people need but can't obtain through legitimate channels. We protect communities that law enforcement has abandoned." It was a romanticized view of organized crime, but I could hear the genuine conviction in his voice. Griffin believed in what he was doing, saw himself as a necessary force in an imperfect world. Whether that belief was justified or simply convenient rationalization didn't change the fact that he was offering me something I'd never had: the chance to be truly important, to work for causes that mattered beyond corporate profit margins. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. Griffin checked his watch, a gesture so normal it seemed surreal after everything that had happened. "The storm is clearing. By morning, you'll need to choose which life you want to live." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Grace, the people who attacked us tonight, they weren't targeting me specifically. They were targeting anyone associated with my organization, which now includes you. Viktor Volkov doesn't distinguish between soldiers and civilians, between combatants and witnesses. The implication was clear. I was already in danger simply by being here, by knowing what I knew. Returning to my old life wouldn't guarantee safety. It might actually ensure the opposite." "Sleep well," Griffin said softly. Tomorrow we'll discuss the details of your new arrangements, whatever they might be. After he left, I stood at the windows looking out at the city below, where millions of people lived ordinary lives governed by ordinary rules. Somewhere out there was my apartment, my office, my carefully constructed existence that had felt so important just hours ago. Now it all seemed as distant and insubstantial as the snow that was finally beginning to taper off, revealing a world that looked the same but felt completely transformed. I woke to pale winter sunlight streaming through windows I didn't recognize, my body aching from tension and restless sleep. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why my muscles felt like I'd been in a fight. Then the events of the previous night crashed back. The gunfire, the bodies in the snow, Griffin's casual efficiency with violence that redefined everything I thought I knew about danger. The penthouse suite looked different in daylight, less like a fairy tale refuge and more like an elegant prison. The antique furniture and museum-quality artwork took on a more sinister cast when viewed as the backdrop for life-altering ultimatums. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread out below like a chessboard where I was apparently just discovering the rules. A soft knock interrupted my brooding. "Come in," I called, expecting Griffin or perhaps the discreet hotel staff. Instead, a woman entered carrying a breakfast tray. Not the uniformed service personnel I'd anticipated, but someone roughly my age with shrewd eyes and an expensive business suit that suggested she was far more than a server. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her expression. "Ms. Morrison," she said, setting the tray on the dining table with practiced efficiency. "I'm Elena Vasquez, Mr. Castellano's attorney. He thought you might prefer to discuss certain aspects of your situation with someone who shares your professional background." A lawyer. Griffin had sent another lawyer to explain why my legal training was suddenly irrelevant to my circumstances. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so terrifying. "What kind of law do you practice?" I asked, settling at the table where Elena had arranged what looked like the most expensive breakfast I'd ever seen. Fresh fruit, artisanal pastries, coffee that smelled like it cost more per pound than most people's monthly grocery budget. "Corporate restructuring, regulatory compliance, international business transactions," Elena replied, taking the seat across from me. "Everything required to maintain complex operations across multiple jurisdictions." "Legitimate operations?" I asked pointedly. Elena's smile was professionally neutral. "Profitable operations. Legitimacy is often a matter of perspective and paperwork." She opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents, arranging them on the table with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't her first time explaining life-changing contracts to reluctant participants. "Mr. Castellano wanted you to understand your options clearly," Elena continued. "He believes informed consent is essential to any lasting business relationship." "Business relationship," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling this?" "What would you prefer to call it?" Elena asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Because the terms remain the same regardless of the terminology." I studied the documents she'd laid out, recognizing some of the standard legal language but missing crucial context. "Walk me through it." Elena gestured to the first document. "Option 1, relocation with new identity. We provide you with a completely clean background, sufficient funds to establish yourself anywhere in the world except the United States, and ongoing security monitoring to ensure your safety. In exchange, you sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements and surrender all previous identification documents." "Exile," I translated. "Protected exile," Elena corrected. "Very comfortable protected exile." She moved to the second set of papers. Option 2, integration into the Castellano organization as a legal consultant. You retain your identity and professional credentials, while taking on responsibilities that utilize your corporate law background. Compensation is substantially higher than your previous position. Benefits include comprehensive security and access to resources unavailable through conventional employers. And the catch? Elena's expression didn't change. Permanent employment. The Castellano family doesn't offer severance packages or retirement plans in the traditional sense. Once you're in, you're in. I picked up the integration documents, scanning through compensation figures that made my junior partnership look like an entry-level position. The benefits package included items I'd never seen in any corporate contract: personal security details, international travel on private aircraft, accommodations that redefined luxury. What kind of legal work would I be doing? I asked. Initially, due diligence on potential acquisitions. The family is always expanding its business interests, and many opportunities require careful legal review to ensure proper structure and minimize regulatory exposure. Elena paused. Eventually, you might handle more sensitive matters, contract negotiations with parties who prefer to avoid official documentation, dispute resolution in situations where traditional courts aren't suitable venues. The euphemisms were elaborate, but the meaning was clear. I'd be helping to launder money, structure illegal enterprises, and negotiate agreements that existed entirely outside the boundaries of legitimate law. Everything I'd spent years learning about ethics and professional responsibility would become irrelevant. How many people work for the Castellano organization? I asked, trying to grasp the scope of what I was being offered. Directly? Perhaps 50 people in positions of real responsibility. Indirectly? Elena shrugged. Thousands. Restaurants, construction companies, import-export businesses, real estate development, private security firms. The family's interests are quite diverse. An empire, I realized. Not just a criminal organization, but a complex web of legitimate and illegitimate enterprises that employed thousands and influenced countless more. The kind of operation that required exactly the sort of legal expertise I'd been developing throughout my career. And Griffin? I asked. What's his role in all this? Elena's expression warmed slightly, the first time she'd shown any personal emotion. Mr. Castellano is the head of the family. His word is law within the organization. His protection absolute for those who earn his trust. She paused. He's also, if you don't mind my saying so, someone who rarely takes personal interest in recruitment decisions. The implication was obvious. Griffin's involvement in my situation went beyond simple organizational necessity. Whether that was good or bad for my prospects remained unclear. Has anyone ever chosen option 1? I asked. Relocation? Occasionally. Usually when family members want to leave the life, or when witnesses require protection. Elena's tone suggested these weren't common occurrences. The arrangements are permanent and comprehensive. New identities don't allow for nostalgia or second thoughts. A life completely severed from everything I'd ever known, everyone I'd ever cared about, however limited that group might be. The prospect should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of liberation. What exactly would I be giving up? A career that consumed my entire existence without providing real satisfaction? Relationships with colleagues who knew nothing about my actual thoughts or feelings? Parents who'd never understood or supported my choices? The compensation package for option 2, I said, returning to the integration documents. These figures seem excessive for legal consulting. Elena smiled, the first genuinely warm expression I'd seen from her. Mr. Castellano believes in paying for the best. He also believes that people who feel properly valued are more likely to remain loyal during difficult periods. Difficult periods? Investigations, territorial disputes, regulatory challenges. This life isn't without its complications, Ms. Morrison, but the rewards are proportional to the risks. I set down the papers and looked out at the city below, where people were beginning their normal Saturday routines, shopping, visiting friends, living ordinary lives with ordinary concerns. 24 hours ago, I'd been one of them, worried about depositions and billable hours and client demands that seemed monumentally important at the time. Elena, I said finally, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret choosing this life? Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer carefully. I regret some of the things I've had to do, she said finally. But I don't regret the person I've become, or the family I've found, or the knowledge that I'm doing work that actually matters. Even though it's illegal. Legal and moral aren't always the same thing, Elena replied. The Castellano family provides order in situations where official authority fails. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We provide opportunities for those who've been excluded from legitimate success. We maintain stability in communities that would otherwise be consumed by chaos. It was the same rationalization Griffin had offered, but Elena's conviction seemed genuine. She believed in what she was doing, saw herself as part of something larger and more important than mere criminal enterprise. How long do I have to decide? I asked. Mr. Castellano will return this afternoon for your answer. He's currently handling some urgent business related to last night's unpleasantness. Elena began gathering the documents. In the meantime, you're welcome to explore the hotel, speak with other family members, get a better sense of what this life actually entails. She paused at the door. Ms. Morrison, for what it's worth, I think you'd be an excellent addition to the organization. You have the intelligence, the training, and the character to thrive in this environment. The question is whether you have the courage to leave your old life behind. After Elena left, I sat in the luxurious silence of the penthouse suite, weighing impossible choices. Through the windows, I could see the bridge where last night's violence had occurred, now innocent-looking in the winter sunlight. Somewhere down there, cleanup crews were probably handling the aftermath of Griffin's efficient brutality, ensuring that official reports would never reflect what had actually happened. The breakfast Elena had brought was growing cold, but I found I had no appetite. How could I eat artisanal pastries while contemplating joining an organization that killed people as casually as I once reviewed contracts? Yet, how could I walk away from the most significant opportunity I'd ever been offered, even if it meant abandoning everything I'd once believed about right and wrong? My phone rang, jarring me from my contemplation. The caller ID showed my office number, Sarah, probably wondering why I hadn't checked in about rescheduling the Boston deposition. I stared at the device, realizing that answering it would mean pretending that my old life still existed, still mattered. I let it go to voicemail. The decision, I realized, had already been made. I just hadn't acknowledged it yet. Griffin returned to the suite at precisely 3 o'clock, carrying himself with the same effortless authority I'd noticed at the airport, but now understood in entirely different terms. He wore a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his dark eyes held the satisfied expression of someone whose morning had been professionally productive. "Grace," he said, settling into the chair across from mine with fluid grace. "I trust Elena explained your options clearly." "Very clearly," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice, though I have some questions about the specifics. Of course. Griffin gestured for me to continue, his full attention focused on me with the intensity I was learning to associate with important business decisions. If I choose integration, what happens to my apartment, my personal belongings, my previous life? Everything you want to keep will be transported here discreetly. Items with sentimental value, important documents, anything that matters to you personally. Griffin paused. Your lease will be terminated. Your office will be notified of your resignation due to family circumstances, and your professional obligations will be handled by our people to ensure no loose ends. The casual efficiency with which he described erasing my existence was both impressive and terrifying. And my parents? What kind of relationship do you have with them? I considered the question honestly. Distant, disapproving. We speak perhaps once a month, usually when they want to express concern about my choices or suggest I should have become a public defender instead of a corporate attorney. Griffin nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. They'll receive periodic communications indicating you're well but busy with your career. Holiday cards, birthday messages, occasional brief phone calls. Nothing that would suggest anything has changed, but nothing that requires ongoing personal contact. You've done this before. When necessary. Griffin's tone suggested this was a routine aspect of recruitment, rather than an unusual accommodation. Family relationships often complicate transitions into our organization. We've developed efficient methods for managing such situations. I walked to the windows, looking down at the city where my old life was being systematically dismantled by people I'd never met, following orders from the man sitting calmly behind me. The scope of his organization's capabilities was becoming clear. This wasn't just crime syndicate, but a comprehensive infrastructure capable of manipulating records, communications, and official documentation with sophisticated precision. What about the people who attacked us last night? I asked. Are there others? Griffin's reflection appeared in the window glass as he stood and moved closer. Viktor Volkov is dead, along with most of his immediate lieutenants. The surviving members of his organization are currently reassessing their position regarding territorial boundaries. His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd solved a complex problem efficiently. However, there will always be others who test our resolve. This life requires constant vigilance. The casual way he discussed murder and territorial control should have horrified me, but instead, I found myself analyzing the strategic implications. If Griffin's organization was under constant threat, then my involvement made me a permanent target regardless of my decision. Leaving wouldn't guarantee safety. It might actually increase my vulnerability. Elena mentioned that people rarely choose relocation, I said, still studying the city below. Why is that? Because once you understand what we offer, exile feels like punishment rather than protection. Griffin moved to stand beside me at the window, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. Power, Grace. Real power, not the illusion of influence you had at your law firm. The ability to solve problems that courts can't address, to protect people who have no other recourse, to build something lasting. And the price? Absolute loyalty, complete discretion, trust in family decisions even when you don't understand them immediately. Griffin turned to face me, his dark eyes intense. The same qualities that make successful lawyers applied to a broader scope of human problems. I thought about my previous life, the endless billable hours, the clients who treated me as an expensive tool rather than a professional advisor, the partners who viewed my contributions as stepping stones to their own advancement. Had I ever felt genuinely important in that world? Had my work ever mattered beyond generating revenue for people who already had more money than they could spend? What specific responsibilities would I have? I asked. Griffin smiled, recognizing the shift in my questioning from whether to accept to how the arrangement would work. Initially, due diligence on acquisitions. We're constantly expanding our legitimate business interests, and many opportunities require careful legal review to ensure proper structure and minimize regulatory exposure. Money laundering, I translated. Asset integration, Griffin corrected smoothly. Ensuring that profitable enterprises operate within appropriate legal frameworks while maximizing tax efficiency and minimizing government interference. The euphemisms were elaborate, but I understood the reality. I'd be helping to legitimize criminal profits through complex business structures designed to obscure their origins. Everything I'd learned about corporate law would be applied to purposes that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal. And eventually, contract negotiations with parties who prefer to avoid official documentation. Dispute resolution in situations where traditional courts aren't suitable venues. Strategic planning for expansion into new markets and territories. Griffin paused. Executive decision-making as you demonstrate competence and earn trust within the organization. He was describing a career path that led to genuine authority within a powerful organization, not the hollow advancement opportunities of corporate law, but real influence over decisions that affected thousands of people. The kind of position I'd never be offered in the legitimate world, no matter how many hours I billed or how many successful cases I handled. How many women hold senior positions in your organization? I asked. Elena is our chief legal counsel. Maria Santori runs our international logistics operations. Carmen DeLuca manages our restaurant and hospitality businesses. Griffin's tone suggested these weren't token appointments, but genuine leadership roles. The Castellano family judges people by competence and loyalty, not by traditional prejudices. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Griffin called permission to enter, and Vincent appeared carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone with urgent information to report. "Boss," Vincent said, nodding respectfully to me before focusing on Griffin. "We've got movement on the Volkov situation. Seems like word has reached Moscow about last night's activities." Griffin's expression hardened. Details. Federal interest is heating up. The bridge incident attracted more attention than we anticipated, and someone downtown is asking questions about traffic patterns and vehicle registrations. Vincent glanced at me uncertainly. "Should we discuss this privately?" "Ms. Morrison is family," Griffin said firmly, making a decision that surprised me with its implications. "Whatever concerns the organization concerns her." Vincent nodded and continued. "The good news is that our people in the mayor's office and police department are handling the official narrative. Weather-related accidents, poor visibility, very tragic but nothing suspicious. The bad news is that federal agencies aren't always cooperative with local arrangements." I listened to their conversation with growing understanding of the scope of Griffin's influence. He had people in city government, law enforcement, probably federal agencies as well. The kind of corruption network that took decades to build and represented genuine institutional power. "Recommendations?" Griffin asked. "Accelerate our timeline on the Manhattan waterfront acquisitions. If federal attention increases, we need more legitimate business interests to justify our presence in certain neighborhoods." Vincent paused. "Also might be wise to activate some of our judicial contacts, ensure that any potential investigations get properly directed." Griffin nodded thoughtfully. "Handle the acquisitions through Elena's people. Make sure everything is structured properly from the beginning." He glanced at me. "And Vincent? Ms. Morrison will be joining Elena's legal team. Make sure she gets access to all relevant files and introduction to our key contacts." The casual way he announced my decision before I'd explicitly made it should have angered me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. The choice had been inevitable from the moment I'd gotten into his car at the airport. Everything since then had been elaborate ceremony around a conclusion that was never really in doubt. "Welcome to the family, Ms. Morrison," Vincent said with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Elena will be pleased to have qualified assistance with the legal workload." After Vincent left, Griffin returned his attention to me with the focused intensity that made conversations feel like negotiations for my soul. "Any regrets about the decision I just made for you?" "Were you wrong?" I asked instead of answering directly. "No." Griffin's smile was confident, but not arrogant. "You're too intelligent to choose exile over opportunity, too ambitious to settle for safety over significance. You want to matter, Grace. You want your work to have real impact on the world." He was right, and we both knew it. The partnership at Whitmore & Associates had been the culmination of everything I'd worked toward, but it had felt hollow the moment I'd achieved it. More work, more responsibility, more money, but no greater sense of purpose or importance. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you move into permanent accommodations here at the hotel while we arrange more suitable long-term housing. Elena will begin your orientation on Monday, starting with current legal projects and introduction to key personnel." Griffin moved to the bar and poured 2 glasses of what looked like very expensive champagne. "Tonight, we celebrate your decision and discuss your future with the family." He handed me one of the glasses, raising his own in a toast. "To new beginnings, Grace, and to the discovery that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we never really had a choice about." I clinked my glass against his, tasting bubbles that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the old apartment. Through the windows, Manhattan glittered in the afternoon light, a city that looked the same, but felt completely different now that I understood how power really operated within its boundaries. Griffin, I said, setting down my glass and meeting his gaze directly. I need you to promise me something. If I can. Don't lie to me about what this life involves. Don't protect me from the reality of what you do, what we do. If I'm going to be part of this, I want to understand all of it. Something shifted in Griffin's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Very well, but understand that knowledge carries its own burdens. Once you know certain things, you can never unknow them. I understand. Griffin nodded slowly. Then welcome to the real world, Grace Morrison. I think you're going to find it far more interesting than the fantasy you've been living. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I realized that everything I'd once considered real, my career, my goals, my understanding of how the world worked, had been shadows on a wall. The life stretching ahead might be dangerous, morally complex, and completely different from anything I'd planned, but it would be authentic in ways my previous existence had never been. For the first time in years, I felt truly awake. 3 weeks later, I stood in Elena's office reviewing acquisition documents for a chain of luxury restaurants that would serve as fronts for money laundering operations, when my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. Grace, it's your mother. Please call immediately. There's been an incident. My blood turned to ice. In the elaborate fiction Griffin's people had constructed around my disappearance, my parents believed I was traveling extensively for a major client, handling international merger negotiations that required extended periods abroad. The communications they received were carefully crafted to maintain that illusion, while gradually reducing their expectations of regular contact. Elena, I said, showing her the message. How is this possible? I thought all communications were being monitored and managed. Elena's expression darkened as she read the text. They are. This message didn't come through our systems. She was already reaching for her secure phone, calling what I'd learned was Griffin's direct line. We have a breach. Griffin arrived within minutes, accompanied by Vincent and 2 other men I recognized as senior security personnel. The casual confidence I'd grown accustomed to seeing in Griffin's bearing was replaced by the cold alertness of someone confronting a direct threat to his operations. Show me the message, he commanded, examining my phone with the intensity of someone who understood that seemingly small details could unravel carefully constructed plans. The number is spoofed, Vincent reported, after running it through their systems. Routing through multiple international proxies, designed to look like it's coming from your mother, but actually originating from a sophisticated technical operation. The Bratva, Griffin said grimly. Victor's death created a power vacuum in their organization, but it seems his replacement is more subtle than his predecessor. Elena was already pulling up files on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Alexei Petrov, Victor's cousin, recently arrived from Moscow, with significantly more resources and intelligence than Victor ever possessed. Our sources suggest he's been conducting surveillance on family operations for weeks. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He knows about me, about my parents. He knows you're important to me, Griffin corrected, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, which makes you valuable leverage. I thought about my parents in their quiet Connecticut home, probably wondering why their daughter's work suddenly required such secretive international travel, possibly growing concerned about the lack of detailed communication. They had no idea that their ordinary suburban existence had been invaded by the violent world I'd chosen to enter. We need to get to them first, I said, surprised by the authority in my own voice, before Alexei decides they're more useful as hostages than as bait. Griffin studied me for a long moment, and I realized this was a test of sorts. How I responded to threats against people I cared about would reveal something essential about my character and my commitment to the family's values. Vincent, mobilize a protection detail immediately, Griffin ordered. Full surveillance and security for the Morrison residence, but keep it invisible. We don't want to alarm them or confirm Alexei's intelligence about Grace's importance. Already handled, Vincent replied, which didn't surprise me anymore. Griffin's organization operated with the kind of efficiency that anticipated problems before they became crises. Team deployed 20 minutes ago, perimeter secured, technical countermeasures in place. Griffin turned back to me, his expression softening slightly. Your parents are safe, Grace, but this situation changes our timeline considerably. How so? Alexei is forcing us to accelerate plans we'd preferred to develop more gradually. Griffin moved to the windows overlooking the city, his posture suggesting he was calculating complex variables I couldn't yet see. He's also making this personal, which requires a different type of response than business disagreements. Elena closed her laptop and gathered the acquisition files we'd been reviewing. Should I postpone the restaurant negotiations? No, Griffin said firmly. Accelerate them. We need those establishments operational within the week, not the month we'd originally planned. He turned to face us. Alexei has made the mistake of assuming that threatening family members will make us more cautious. He's about to discover how wrong that assumption is. The calm way Griffin discussed escalating what was already a war sent a familiar chill down my spine. But this time it was accompanied by something else. Satisfaction. These people had threatened my parents, invaded the peaceful life my mother and father had built through decades of honest work and simple values. Whatever response Griffin was planning, they'd earned it. What do you need from me? I asked. Griffin's smile was sharp and predatory. Legal cover for some very aggressive business expansion. Elena will brief you on the specific requirements, but essentially we need to acquire controlling interests in several businesses that provide strategic access to Alexei's operations. Hostile takeovers, I translated. Comprehensive acquisition strategies, Griffin corrected with dark humor. Entirely legal, though perhaps not entirely conventional in their implementation timeline. Over the next 72 hours, I worked with Elena to structure the most complex and aggressive business campaign I'd ever been involved in. Using shell companies, offshore accounts, and legal mechanisms I'd never seen deployed so ruthlessly, we acquired controlling interests in 3 shipping companies, 2 warehouse facilities, and a construction firm that collectively formed the infrastructure supporting Alexei's American operations. The work was exhilarating in ways my previous corporate practice had never been. Instead of shuffling papers to help wealthy clients become wealthier, I was wielding legal expertise like a weapon, dismantling an enemy's capability to threaten people I cared about. Every contract I structured, every acquisition I completed, every regulatory filing I submitted was part of a larger strategic campaign that would determine whether Griffin's family or Alexei's organization controlled criminal activity in New York. You're enjoying this, Elena observed on the 3rd night as we worked through documentation for the final acquisition. More than I expected, I admitted. There's something satisfying about using corporate law to destroy someone who deserves it. Elena smiled. Griffin was right about you. You understand that law is just another tool, and tools are only as moral as the purposes they serve. By Thursday morning, our campaign was complete. Alexei's operations had been systematically dismantled through legitimate business acquisitions, backed by overwhelming financial resources and legal expertise. His shipping routes were disrupted. His storage facilities were under new management, and his construction projects had been halted by regulatory challenges we'd carefully orchestrated. Status report, Griffin requested as our team gathered in his private conference room. Alexei's organization is effectively paralyzed, Vincent reported with obvious satisfaction. Revenue streams cut off, operational infrastructure compromised, key personnel reassigned or eliminated. He's got perhaps 48 hours of remaining capability before complete collapse. And the Morrison family? Griffin asked. Safe and unaware, Vincent confirmed. Our protection detail reports no unusual activity, no surveillance, no contact attempts. As far as they know, their daughter is still traveling for business and will return when her international projects are completed. Griffin nodded, then turned to me. "Congratulations, Grace. Your first major project for the family has been remarkably successful." The praise should have felt hollow given the circumstances, but instead, it filled me with genuine pride. I'd contributed something essential to protecting people I cared about, while simultaneously demonstrating my value to the organization that had become my new family. The skills I'd developed through years of corporate practice had found their perfect application. "What happens to Alexei?" I asked. Griffin's expression became unreadable. "He'll receive one opportunity to withdraw his operations from American territory and return to Moscow with whatever assets he can salvage. If he accepts, he lives. If he refuses..." The alternative hung unspoken in the air, but we all understood. This was the moment when Alexei would discover that threatening Griffin's family carried consequences that went far beyond business competition. 2 days later, Elena informed me that Alexei had chosen to accept Griffin's terms. His organization was withdrawing from American operations entirely, abandoning millions of dollars in infrastructure rather than continuing a war they couldn't win. He made the smart choice, Griffin told me that evening as we shared dinner in his private dining room at the hotel. Though I suspect his superiors in Moscow aren't entirely pleased with how quickly he surrendered territorial claims they'd spent years developing. "And my parents?" "Will continue to receive periodic communications indicating you're well and busy with your career. The protection detail will remain in place indefinitely, but they'll never know it exists." Griffin paused. "Unless you'd prefer to re-establish direct contact with them?" I considered the question seriously. The fiction we'd created around my disappearance could easily be modified to allow for normal family relationships. But did I want that? Did I want to compartmentalize my new life, maintaining connections to people who could never understand or accept what I'd become? "No," I said finally. "This is my family now. They belong to the world I left behind." Griffin's smile was warm and genuine. "I'm glad you feel that way, Grace, because there's something I want to discuss with you." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, setting it on the table between us with the casual precision that characterized all his important gestures. My heart stopped, then resumed beating at double speed as I realized what this moment represented. "Griffin," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "This isn't what you think it is," he said softly. "Not entirely, anyway. This is a business proposition that happens to involve personal feelings I wasn't expecting to develop." I stared at the box, afraid to open it, afraid not to. "What kind of business proposition?" "The kind where the woman I'm falling in love with becomes my wife, my partner in every aspect of family operations, and the mother of the next generation of Castellanos." Griffin's voice was steady, but I could see tension in his shoulders that suggested this conversation mattered more to him than his casual tone implied. "You're falling in love with me?" I asked, focusing on the part of his statement that seemed most impossible. "Inconvenient, isn't it?" Griffin's smile was rueful. "I'd planned to keep our relationship strictly professional, but you've made that impossible. Your intelligence, your courage, your willingness to embrace this life completely. You've become essential to me in ways that go far beyond your legal expertise." I opened the velvet box to reveal a ring that took my breath away, not because of its obvious value, though the diamond was spectacular, but because of its design. The setting incorporated elements that clearly referenced my previous life. Scales of justice worked into the band, a secondary stone that matched my birthstone, details that showed Griffin had been paying attention to things I'd never explicitly told him. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's also a binding contract," Griffin said seriously. "Marriage in my family isn't just personal commitment. It's institutional alliance. You'd become my equal partner in all family decisions, my heir if anything happens to me, the mother of children who will inherit everything we build together." "And if I say no?" Griffin's expression didn't change. "Then you remain a valued member of the family, my trusted legal counsel, and someone I care about deeply, but can never fully claim as my own. The choice he was offering was between belonging completely to this world or remaining forever at its periphery, between becoming the most powerful woman in one of New York's most influential families, or staying a highly paid employee with no real authority over my own destiny. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the answer came. Griffin's smile transformed his entire face, revealing genuine joy beneath the controlled authority I'd grown accustomed to seeing. He slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that trembled slightly, the first time I'd ever seen him display anything approaching nervousness. "When?" I asked, admiring how the diamond caught the candlelight. "Tomorrow," Griffin replied. "Elena has already prepared the documentation, and I have a judge who owes the family several favors. We'll have a private ceremony here at the hotel, followed by a reception for senior family members." "Tomorrow?" I repeated, overwhelmed by the speed of everything. Alexei's defeat has created opportunities that need to be seized quickly. Having you as my wife rather than my attorney will provide additional authority in negotiations with other families who respect traditional power structures. Griffin reached across the table to take my hand. "Besides, I've discovered I'm not particularly patient when I want something." As we sat in the elegant dining room, Manhattan glittering through the windows like a constellation of possibilities, I realized that the scared corporate lawyer who'd shared a taxi 3 weeks ago had completely disappeared. In her place was someone I barely recognized, a woman capable of dismantling criminal organizations through hostile takeovers, someone comfortable with violence when it served necessary purposes, a person who'd found her perfect place in a world that operated by rules she was finally beginning to understand. The ring on my finger wasn't just an engagement ring. It was a badge of membership in the most exclusive and dangerous organization in New York. Tomorrow I would become Mrs. Griffin Castellano, with all the power and peril that title implied. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely excited about the future.